talking to educators, and I think, for me, I think it's serious business, because when you talk to one educator, you're actually talking to thousands of people. So for me, the most useful group to talk to in the change I'm looking for are educators. Because think about it, there are people who can go through this whole life and never go to a doctor, a lawyer, or anybody. But there's literally none of us who can go through the whole of our lives without going to an educator. So the changes we're trying to make, if we can get our educators to pass that change across, and if we can get our educators to actually see that the work that we're doing is in the transformation of lives, that people's identities are being formed. I think sometimes we think it's just only head knowledge. No, people's identities, the time, the 5 years, the 10 years, or the 2 years they spend with us, we are contributing to their identities. We are contributing to who they are becoming. And I think that, so for me, as an educator, I think that if we all look at our work like that, I think we are going to make some massive changes that, we have not seen. So that spiel is for me to say, my name is Ebun Joseph. I'm the founding director of the Institute of Anti-Racism and Black Studies. I'm trying to be mature now and read some of the stuff I have. I do a lot of ad-lib. I wrote this from my head, but, just be mature and read some stuff, and so I can make sure I don't get, I wanted to say this and I didn't say it. So I'm trying to make sure I say all the things that I want to say. So I'm the founding director of the Institute of Anti-Racism and Black Studies. My journey to the Institute is actually a response to the change I'm trying to bring. My academic background is a degree in microbiology. Ooh, so it's like, how did microbiology get you here? But yes, I started from that. I'm one of those kids who wanted to please my dad. He wanted me to be a science student. He thought, if you're a science student, you get a job for life. In Nigeria, I'm originally from Nigeria, and they say, there are only 3 occupations. You're either a doctor, a lawyer, or a disgrace to the family. Obviously, I was probably one, but I got a PhD now, so maybe I'm doctor, but I try to say, not medical, right? But so that's how I started microbiology. But in the course of time, and when I relocated to Ireland, I knew that some of the work I was doing was giving advice to people. I said, okay, so how do I give this advice without damaging them? So I went and studied a degree in, I went and studied adult guidance and counseling. I did the postgrad and the master's. But, and that brought me to work with the Royal College of Surgeons, work with UCD, work with EPIC. I don't know if you know EPIC, but I work with EPIC, for 9 years. That was my starting job, in Ireland. And one of the things I noticed when I was working with EPIC, before I went to UCD and RCSI, was that depending on the nationality of the person who came to us to look for help, it took us a longer time. When they were Western Europeans, it took us 3 to 6 months. We find placement for them, even when their English wasn't so good. And then when they were Eastern Europeans, it took us about 9 to 13 months to find something. When they were Black Africans, it took us an average of 2 years to shift them along. And even when we shifted them along, it was to unemployed work, unpaid work. So it was either back to more training or more or unpaid work. I was like, okay, how do I explain this? How do I find the vocabulary? How do I explain what I'm observing? And so that brought me to do, so my master's, my research was there. I looked at it in my research. My postgrad, I looked at it there. And when I went and did a PhD, that was the same thing I looked at again. And so, so in all of that, what I found that, there is, what my work then began to show that there is racial inequity, and that this racial inequity is through a system which I describe as racial stratification, that there is a racial order. Because think about it, whether you're in Ireland, or whether you're in Dublin, in London, in New York, New Jersey, the same group of people appear at the bottom of the ladder. Why? So it must either be that there is something wrong with this group of people that makes them appear at the bottom of the ladder, or there is a system of operation that positions them at the bottom. So my work began to uncover that there is a racial order that this racial order, everybody knows. If I did the experiment here now, I promise you, you will give me the same answer. But I only have 2 minutes, so I can't do the experiment here. But that there's a racial order, and that this order is a stratification. So Western Europeans at the top, Eastern Europeans at the middle, those who are classified as black at the bottom. And so it means that for you to achieve the same result as those at the top, you have to start from here. You have to work 1, 2, 3 times harder to achieve the same result. And that racial order guarantees that unless you do something out of the ordinary, you will end up where others like yourself have ended up. So that's the system. So whether it's New York or anywhere, so it's not that people are mad or they're stupid or they can't study, but that the system of operation, makes that up. So that's really what I've been trying to change. I know that education is not racism, is not because of ignorance. So that I want to disabuse your mind. It's not ignorance. It's not ignorance that causes racism, right? But education can help. And that's why we are appealing to education to make some of the changes that we are seeing. Okay, my first point here is saying that I said that naming it difficult conversation is already a setup to fail. So maybe, an institute can have a difficult conversation, but in your office or in your school, when you name talking about race or racisms, having difficult conversation, you have already prepared the person for resistance. You have already prepared them for something unpalatable. Suicide, taking their own life, is a difficult conversation. Somebody's died from an hemorrhage. That is a difficult conversation, but we don't call it difficult conversation. We have the conversation. So when we name it, naming is so powerful. You've already put me, I'm like, I'm already like, she's going to say something now. So I don't call it difficult, I call them healthy. So in my work, when I train, the first thing I do, I cross it out and I call it healthy conversation. So it's to change, even in your classrooms as teachers, don't call it difficult. When you're a trainer, training trainers is a different thing because they are mature minds. But when you are talking to end users, never call them difficult. You've already spoiled it. Another thing is, we have this internal fragility, particularly as white people. Robert D'Angelo called it white fragility. But I want you to think about Frantz Fanon. If you want to read, go back and read what Fanon talked about it. Frantz Fanon called it, cognitive dissonance, where we try and gain back our equilibrium. When we start talking about this issue of racism, we start getting uncomfortable. So I find that when I'm working with people and I tell them it's going to become uncomfortable. See, when you go to a doctor, as educators, you have to be psychedelic in your work. I don't know how to explain that. Like when I feel like a doctor, like I'm trying to do what my father said. In my other life where I'm a doctor. So when I want to talk to people who I know is going to be difficult for them to hear it, I tell them, I say, like a doctor, it's, when I want to give you an injection, I tell you it's going to hurt a bit, but it's going to make you better. So I warn you, it's going to get uncomfortable, but sit with it. Don't change, don't move. You're going to learn something. If you can sit through the uncomfortableness, you're going to get better. So I prepare you that you might feel uncomfortable. Don't internalize it. Don't personalize. It's not you. Whiteness. You didn't do anything to be white. I didn't do anything to be black. So those are the conversations I have in setting up. That's how I set up my room. So that we are there as neutral bodies. So you don't have any guilt coming into the training. I don't carry no guilt. So I can put my stuff on the table and walk. So you have to be able to take what you need and walk. Is that guilt? People start getting red. I say, when you can't say the word supremacy, you can't mention black without feeling black, you can't teach anybody. If you can't come there where you are comfortable, we're using the word black, we're using the word white supremacy, white privilege. If you can't learn those, you can't bring anybody there. So those are like key things. Our systems are predominantly white, white persons. But as a white person, you're not raised. And so that is a major problem. So that when we start talking about racism, we think it's for the others. It's these people. No. And that's why we don't get results. Until, as educators, we talk about race and you and I are race. Every one of us in it. If all of us are not in this topic called race, it never works. So those are like key, some of the key things. When people say, and we have not invested time to know, how to define the terms. Like defining those terms, and a lot of the work we do in the sector, we do a lot of the work on racialized identities or asylum seekers. We do on mixed race. I say, those are racialized identities. They are identities. That is not race. It is an identity. Identities can change. So the difficulty is we are not doing the deep work. We are feeding off emotional labor. Most of your schools are getting little kids who are in secondary school or primary school or universities. They are still learning. We say that all skin is not kin. That because you're black doesn't mean that you're an expert in racism. I have black people who argue with me that there's no racism. Because they were imported from UK straight. They did no interview. They were imported, so they came here. They have no history with Ireland. So, so those are some of the things that, that the deepness of the work is what we need to begin to do. So I think.
Can I just ask you to say a little bit more about that deep work? So for educators, what does that actually involve?
Yeah, so for educators, some of the key things is that for you to actually do this work on racism, the number one thing is you must have what we call a race consciousness. Race consciousness. Look at it. Two people witness the same thing. You and I, we witness the same thing. I am angry, and you're like, it was okay. What was the difference between you and I? Nobody said anything to me. Why did I read something different from what you're reading? That thing that I have that makes me to read the circumstances differently from you, you must look for it. If you really want to do anti-racism work, you want to be an anti-racist, you want to be an ally, you must look for what I have. It is teachable, you can learn it. If you read my new book, I have a chapter where I talk about race consciousness, how to develop race consciousness. If you don't have it, I promise you, you cannot do the work. It will be head knowledge. And you will be one of those who caused the damage, you caused the hurt. When the students come to you and say, oh, he called me, he said, oh, it was a bit of banter. So I can never tell you that, calling people names is a bit of banter. Why do I feel differently? That's what you need to get. So it's a race consciousness. The second thing is that it is systematic. That you have to understand this racism. It's not behavioral. We're trying to change behavior. Forget about the behavior. We can use punishment to change behavior. It's system. Because if it was behavior, if you get rid of the manager, then the whole organization should change, right? Yeah? If you get rid of the racist manager, then the whole organization should be non-racist, right? Does it change? Does it? No, there's a system. So racism is not behavior. He said, she said, he did. No, there's a system. Racism is systemic. And when we look at, I sometimes I jokingly compare COVID and, racism, but I don't have the time for that. And then the third thing is, power and policy. Racism only exists. There are two things that makes racism to continue. Only two things, power and policy. If there is no policy, every racist idea that is existing today is backed by power, is backed by policy. If you go back to racist America, I don't mean America has been racist, but, in the time when, we had slavery and all of that, every time, the Jim Crow laws, the laws came in. When when slavery was stopped, Jim Crow laws came in. So the laws always come in, to protect this institution of racism. So if you want to change racism, you want to learn about it, you have to look at what is the law that is backing this system within your organization, within your institution. What are the policies that we have in place that is making racism endemic, that makes it permanently reproduced? And the last thing I said there is that you have to understand that whiteness already advantages whites. You must know that whiteness already advantages whites, and that whiteness operates by a system of supremacy, white supremacy. If I ask how many people have done anti-racism training, I'm sure most of you will say, if I ask how many of you were taught about white supremacy in your anti-racism training, probably less than 2. Anybody was taught about white supremacy during the anti-racism training? 1. See, there's 1 there, 2. There's 2. right? And I'm sure many of us have done anti-racism. If you do not learn about white supremacy, I promise you, whatever you've learned about anti-racism is not it. Because anti-racism is built on only one thing: white superiority. And white superiority is what we call white supremacy. But white supremacy, don't get it wrong. It's not just KKK. That is extremism. KKK is extremism. White supremacy is the idea, the belief that a group of people are superior, they are better than the other. That's how racism started. Race did not create racism. Racism existed. It is the institution of racism that they created something called race to protect racism.